So that I can respond properly to a perennial request of yours, you mind if I leapfrog ahead to page 4? I've been telling you how most of 1 million seniors lost their HMO-provided Medicare supplement coverage this past year, and how for the third straight year, the independent insurance industry rating service, Weiss Ratings, advised seniors who lost their HMO Medicare coverage, do not join another HMO. Now, choosing the right Medicare supplement policy is important. And I want to tell you about United American Insurance, which has been around since the start of Medicare, and it'll be around whenever you need them, because I'd like you to have a copy of something called a Guide to Health Insurance for People with Medicare. This booklet is free, and it'll help answer your questions about Medicare and Medicare supplement policies, including the exclusions and the limitations. United American has no connection with Medicare, but this helpful information will be provided at no cost if you'll just let me have your address. Telephone 1-800-424-7000. Before the new year begins now, let's telephone 1-800-424-7000. Write down that number. It's an 800 number, 424-7000. And all you need to do is ask for the free Guide to Health Insurance for People with Medicare. 1-800-424-7000. The Christmas Story. I mean, the God born a man in a manger and all that escapes some moderns, mostly, I think, because they seek complex answers to their questions, and this one is so utterly simple. For the cynics and the skeptics and the unconvinced, may I submit a modern parable. The man I'm going to describe was not a Scrooge. He was a kind, decent, a mostly good man, generous to his family, upright in his dealings with other men, but he just didn't believe all that incarnation stuff which the churches proclaim at Christmas time. It just didn't make sense, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He couldn't swallow the Jesus story about God coming to earth as a man. I'm truly sorry to distress you, he told his wife, but I'm not going with you to church this Christmas Eve. He said he'd feel like a hypocrite, that he'd much rather stay home, but that he would wait up for them. So he stayed, and they went to the midnight service. Shortly after the family drove away in the car, snow began to fall. He went to the window to watch the flurries getting heavier and heavier, and then he went back to his fireside chair and began to read the newspaper. Minutes later, he was startled by a thudding sound, and then another, and then another. At first, he thought somebody must be throwing snowballs against the living room window. But when he went to the front door to investigate, what he found was a flock of birds huddled miserably in the snow. They had been caught in the storm and in a desperate search for shelter had tried to fly through his large landscape window. Well, he couldn't let the poor creatures lie there and freeze, so he remembered the barn where his children stabled their pony. That would provide a warm shelter if he could direct the birds to the barn. Quickly, he put on a coat and galoshes and tramped through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the doors wide, turned on a light, but the birds did not come in. He figured food would entice them, so he hurried back to the house and fetched breadcrumbs and sprinkled those on the snow, making a trail to the yellow-lighted, wide-open doorway of the stable. But to his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs and continued to flop around helplessly in the snow. He tried catching them. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around them, waving his arms. Instead, they scattered in every direction, except into the warm-lighted barn. And then, of course, he realized that they were afraid of him. To them, he reasoned, I'm a strange, terrifying creature. If I could only think of some way to let them know that they can trust me, that I'm not trying to hurt them, I'm trying to help them. But how can I do that? Any move he made tended to frighten them, to confuse them. They just would not follow. They would not be led. They would not be shooed because they feared him. If only I could be a bird, he thought to himself. If I could be a bird and mingle with them and speak their language, I could tell them not to be afraid. I could show them the way to the safe, warm barn. But I would have to be one of them. One of them so that they could see and hear and understand. I would have to be one of them. At that moment, the church bells began to ring, and the sound reached his ears above the sounds of the wind. And he stood there listening to the bells at Esti Fidelis, listening to the bells pealing the glad tidings of Christmas. And he sank to his knees in the snow. Paul Harvey Merry Christmas.